The note said to burn her clothes before dawn. At first, I thought it was a cruel joke, some macabre ritual of grief, until I saw her handwriting, steady, deliberate, the loops of her letters exactly as they'd always been. My name sat beneath her final words, and beneath that, the faint scent of lavender. I am Margaret, 63, widow, mother of none, daughter to the woman whose request now turns my house into a tomb. The dawn outside presses against the curtains, pale and uncertain. Her clothes hang still in the corner, the same dresses she wore to church, to Sunday tea, to those quiet afternoons when we would sit by the window counting the cracks in the street. The warmth of home lingers for a moment, toast cooling on the table, the kettle sighing once before it stills. Then the silence takes shape. I read the note again. Burn her clothes before dawn. Each word feels heavier than the one before it, as if she had written them with ash instead of ink. I whisper, "Why would you want that, Mother?" But the air only folds around my voice, returning nothing. I move toward her closet. The door creaks, familiar and defiant. The faint scent of her perfume clings to everything, lavender and starch and something older, like dust waiting for purpose. My fingers tremble over the sleeves, the worn seams she refused to mend. The candle's flame shivers as though it hears my hesitation. I remember the nights when she'd sit by that same candle, mending, humming under her breath. "Careful hands keep the world together," she'd tell me. I believed her then. Now the words taste wrong, hollowed out by whatever truth she left unsaid. The paper lies on the nightstand beside her reading glasses, smudged at the corner. A stain, faint brown, dried long ago, edges one of the lines. It could be tea or blood. The thought chills me, but I keep reading, searching for sense where there is none. The handwriting falters only once, near the end, where her name breaks slightly before the final loop. Outside, a sparrow beats against the window, frantic. I take it as an omen, though I can't tell of what. I glance at the clock. It's 5:42 a.m. I have less than an hour before dawn fully breaks. My vow solidifies quietly. I will not set anything aflame until I understand why she wanted it gone. I pick up the candle and bring it close to the paper. The wax smell mixes with the faint lavender, sweet and sickening all at once. The wick bends, whispering in its small light. "You knew I'd find it," I murmur. "You wanted me to." I think of her voice, sharp when she wanted control, gentle when she pretended love. "We keep our secrets where no one can touch them," she once told me. Maybe the clothes were her secrets. Maybe she feared they'd tell what she never could. My gaze drifts to the old fireplace where she used to sit knitting. The hearth is clean now, too clean, as if scrubbed for ceremony. The matches lie beside, the poker ready. I imagine flames licking through fabric, the smell of burning thread, the silence that would follow. But another memory interrupts, the night she clasped my hands after Father's funeral. "Promise me," she said, "when I'm gone, you'll keep the house warm." I promised. Burning it all would make it colder than ever. A gust sneaks through the cracked window, stirring the candle's smoke into a thin veil. For a heartbeat, I swear I see her shadow move across the wall, slow, deliberate, watching. I blink, and it's gone. Only the smell of wax remains. I fold the note carefully, as if folding her voice into quiet. I place it back on the nightstand and whisper to the empty room, "I'll find out what you feared." The house creaks in reply, a long, tired exhale. I light another candle, steadier than the first. The flame steadies my resolve. Somewhere between the scent of lavender and smoke, a truth hides, waiting for me to burn or to remember. I will not let the fire decide for me. The ink smelled faintly of smoke. Her dresses whispered when I touched them. The fabric moved as if it remembered her body, the rhythm of her walking, the quiet grace that once filled this room. The air was thick with starch and perfume, a scent that tried to disguise something rotten beneath it. When I first opened the closet, I only wanted to feel her presence again. but the moment my hand brushed against the lining of a sleeve, I felt a ridge where the seam should have been flat. I leaned closer. The stitching was too new, the thread color just slightly off. I tugged at it gently, and a tiny paper triangle slipped out, folded once, then twice. My fingers shook as I opened it. A date. A set of initials. The paper was thin, brittle, as if it had been hidden for years. I checked another dress, then another. Each hem carried its own secret. I sat on the carpet, surrounded by fabric that now felt like skin. Warm, suffocating. The pattern repeated. Initials, short notes, addresses written in her slanted hand. Each one different, but all in the same ink. I took my phone, the light dim against the old wood, and began photographing each slip, one by one. I told myself I was just preserving them before time ate them away, but in truth, I was afraid to stop. The texture of each fabric changed as I went, some soft as memory, some coarse, as though resisting my search. "Why would you hide these?" I whispered. The silence inside the closet deepened, pressing against my ears. Footsteps creaked down the hallway. My sister's voice drifted in, faint but sharp. "You shouldn't be in there." I froze. "I just need a moment," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. Her shadow paused at the doorway, long enough for me to sense judgment in the stillness. Then it moved away. The dresses swayed slightly on their hangers, whispering as if conspiring among themselves. I found one with an unfamiliar fabric, thicker, heavier. Inside its hem, another note, but this one was different. Instead of names or numbers, it read, "Don't trust what you remember." I stared at those words until they blurred. My hand went cold. The room itself seemed to tilt. I knew then this wasn't grief I was uncovering. It was design. She had left these for me to find, but not to comfort me, to guide me, or maybe to warn me. A knock startled me. It was Robert, my mother's old friend, the one who'd helped arrange her affairs after she passed. "Margaret," he said softly, "you should rest. This isn't good for you." His tone carried the kind of sympathy that hides worry. "I'm fine," I told him, though I could see the disbelief in his eyes. He crouched near the doorway, looking at the pile of dresses like they might bite. "She was private," he murmured. "You know that." "Private doesn't mean innocent," I said quietly. He hesitated before standing. "Don't let this consume you. Grief changes the way things look." Then after a pause, "Sometimes what you find isn't what was meant for you." When he left, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The note's edge pricked my thumb. A bead of blood marked its corner. I folded it and tucked it into my pocket, my heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the ticking clock in the hall. The dresses seemed to lean closer as I stood. My reflection in the closet mirror looked older, thinner, someone between the woman I had been and the one my mother believed I'd become. I smoothed the fabric of the nearest dress, the thread coarse against my palm, and whispered to the empty air, "I won't stop now." I turned to leave, but something pale fluttered from the hem of a dark coat at the back. I reached for it. Another note, smaller than the rest, unfolded in the dim light. My throat tightened as I read the single line written across it. One note carried my own name. "Good deeds have a cost when written in ink." The phrase came to me as I sat alone at her desk, the smell of old paper rising like something alive. The room was still, except for the faint hum of morning outside, distant birds, a passing car, a life that didn't belong to me anymore. The ledger sat open before me, bound in worn leather, embossed with a single word: kindness. At first, I thought it was one of her church books, another record of the donations she liked to boast about after Sunday service. But the columns were too precise. The handwriting, though neat, trembled in certain places. Names, amounts, dates. My eyes followed the ink like a confession trail. Mrs. Warren, $2,400. James Burke, $3,750. Ruth Henry, $1,200. Each line carried a small note beside it, written in her delicate hand. Promised repayment. Interest owed. Final settlement. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. These weren't gifts. They were debts. The light shifted through the thin curtains, landing directly on the ink. It gleamed for a second, sharp enough to sting my eyes. That glimmer of light felt accusatory, as if the sun itself wanted me to look closer. I did. She'd titled one page, Benevolence Fund. Another, Repayment Schedule. My stomach twisted. This wasn't charity. It was control dressed as generosity. Every good deed she'd ever done came with an invoice. The realization burned slow and cruel, like the beginning of a fever. I reached the bottom of the page. A total, $14,350. A number neat and final, underlined twice. I whispered it out loud, testing its shape, its weight. $14,350. It didn't sound like kindness at all. The house seemed to lean closer around me, listening. I turned another page, and the names became more familiar. People who'd come to her funeral, who'd wept at her coffin. Their tears now looked like payments collected in advance. I found one name circled twice. Margaret. My breath caught. The entry beside it read, Credit extension, $8,000, to be reconciled. The word reconciled bled into the margin. I hadn't borrowed a cent from her, not in my entire life. I stood, heart pounding. The window light dimmed as a cloud moved across the sky. I whispered, "What did you do, Mother?" The silence that answered wasn't empty. It was dense, the kind that carries echoes of unspoken guilt. I needed confirmation. I went next door to Mrs. Warren's house. She had known my mother for 30 years. When she opened the door, her smile faltered. "You've been looking through her papers," she said, before I even spoke. "I just need to understand," I said. "Did my mother ever lend you money?" Her eyes darted behind me, as if afraid someone might hear. "I don't owe her anything," she said quickly. "I paid what was fair." Then, softer, "It's better to leave the past alone." She closed the door before I could reply. The slam echoed down the porch steps like a verdict. I stood there for a long time, staring at the peeling paint, hearing her voice in my head. "Leave it alone." Back inside, the ledger waited. I turned to the last page. The ink there was newer, darker. Her signature looped perfectly, just as I remembered from every letter she'd ever signed. But beside it, another name. Mine. The handwriting wasn't forged, it was real. My name, written in the same pen, beside her own. The line read, "Joint liability, confirmed." Dated exactly 3 weeks before her death. My hands went numb. I pressed my fingers to the page, feeling the texture of dried ink, the indentation where she'd pressed too hard. "No," I whispered. "No, you didn't." I tried to remember where I was 3 weeks before she died, packing boxes, visiting the lawyer, preparing the house for her care nurse. I hadn't signed anything, and yet the ethos record said I had. The sun slipped lower, cutting across the room in a single hard beam. It hit the ledger again, illuminating the signature like a wound. I closed the book slowly. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my wrists, everywhere the truth tried to escape. Every act of kindness had been a transaction. Every word of love, an entry. And somehow I was written into it. I sat there until the light faded and the page turned gray. My mother's voice came back in fragments. "We take care of what's ours. We keep accounts balanced." I had thought she meant fairness. Now I knew she meant ownership. I whispered to the dark, "You didn't trust anyone, did you?" But even the house stayed silent this time. She'd signed me into her debts. They knew my name before I spoke. The teller's smile was already waiting for me, fixed, polished, a professional disguise. The marble counter gleamed beneath the ceiling lights, cold enough to see my reflection in it. I hadn't said a word, yet the clerk reached beneath the desk and drew out an envelope sealed in red wax. "You've come for the confirmation package," he said. His tone wasn't a question. The paper felt heavier than it should have. My pulse quickened with that quiet dread that arrives before understanding. "What is this?" I asked. He glanced at the monitor, then back to me. "Authorization for transfer. Your name's already on the record." I unfolded the first page. The letterhead bore the bank's insignia, 3 embossed initials I recognized from my mother's financial files. Beneath it, her signature sprawled elegantly across the bottom. Next to it, in neat blue ink, was mine. Except it wasn't. My own hand trembled above the imitation, tracing the way the forger had pressed too hard on the loop of the G. The pen had dug into the page like intent itself. "This isn't possible," I whispered. "I never signed this." The clerk's expression didn't change. He tapped his keyboard once. "The transaction total is $87,500, he said, his voice mechanical. "It was pre-cleared for release upon identity verification." "Identity verification?" I repeated. "You didn't even ask for my ID." His gaze flicked up from the screen, cautious now. The printer behind him hummed to life, spitting out another page. The sound filled the air like a slow confession. "You're listed as secondary executor," he said. "It's all standard procedure." "Standard for what? Fraud?" He froze, then lowered his voice. "Look," he murmured. "I just follow the instructions we're given. She was very specific." "Specific about what?" He hesitated, eyes darting toward the security camera above the counter. "About who takes responsibility if anything goes wrong." Something in my chest tightened. "You were always meant to take the fall." The words weren't spoken, yet I heard them in his silence. Behind me, a soft voice called my name. It was Emma, the legal assistant who'd helped me review my mother's will. She'd been waiting by the chairs near the glass partition. She motioned me over, her expression careful. "Come into the side room," she said. Inside, the air was cooler. She shut the door quietly before speaking. "I didn't know about this account," she said. "It's separate from the estate we handled." "There's a signature," I told her. "Mine. But it isn't mine." Emma leaned over the page, squinting. "Ink pressure analysis will show it's not recent," she said. "But if it's notarized, it complicates things." "She forged me," I said flatly. "She did," Emma admitted. "But proving intent is harder. It's delicate when family is involved." I felt a rush of anger. "Delicate? She's been dead for 2 months, and she's still controlling the living." Emma's eyes softened, but her voice stayed measured. "You need to decide if you want exposure or closure. The two rarely come together." "I want the truth." She nodded once. "Then we start quietly. I'll request the verification reference, the one tied to her last appointment. It'll have an alphanumeric ID attached. If it's missing, we'll know the bank helped her hide something." The printer in the outer office stopped. The silence that followed was almost merciful. I glanced through the glass door. The clerk was watching us. When our eyes met, he looked away too quickly. "Emma," I said slowly, "how long would something like this have taken to set up?" "Months," she replied. "Sometimes years. She would have needed access to both your personal and financial details." "She had everything," I murmured. "She always did." Emma gathered the papers and slipped them into a file. "We'll log this under inquiry reference A12B93, she said. "That's your proof marker. Keep it safe." The hum of the fluorescent lights above deepened, steady as a heartbeat. I thought of my mother sitting in this same office, smiling at the same clerk, spinning the same web of trust. She hadn't just managed her finances, she had choreographed her power, one forged page at a time. When Emma stood, her tone changed. "You know," she said, "I don't think this was about the money." I looked at her, waiting. "She wanted control," she said quietly. "Even after death." I exhaled slowly. "Then she's still winning." Emma hesitated. "Not if we find what's missing from that vault." The word vault echoed in my mind like an unfinished sentence. Somewhere inside it, her motive pulsed like a heartbeat waiting to be heard. As I turned to leave, the clerk called out softly, "Miss, you left the envelope." I met his eyes, steady now. "Keep it," I said. You'll need it more than I will." His face paled. For the first time, the professional calm cracked. I walked out into the corridor, the echo of the printer following me like footsteps I didn't trust. I knew this was only the surface. My mother's will wasn't the only signature forged. The dead called back. The blinking red light pulsed in the dark like a heartbeat that wouldn't quit. I stood there, barefoot on the cold floor, watching it flash from across the room. One blink every 3 seconds, steady, deliberate, impossible. The answering machine hadn't worked in years. I reached for the switch, half afraid it might stop if I touched it. When I pressed play, her voice filled the silence. "They will come for what's not theirs." The words were sharp, trembled, soaked in fear. I froze. It wasn't a memory. It wasn't an echo. It was her, my mother. The sound crackled, heavy with static. I could hear her breathing at the edges of each word, the tiny quiver of effort before every sentence. Then the tape cut off mid-breath. I pressed rewind, play, again. The same sentence, the same warning. But with each replay, the static deepened, warping her tone, twisting it into something near pleading. By the third playback, it sounded less like a message and more like a command. They will come for what's not theirs. The air in the room thickened. My throat felt tight. The hum of electricity seemed to grow louder. The refrigerator, the clock on the wall, the faint buzz from the lamp I'd forgotten to turn off. "Stop," I whispered. "Stop it!" But the machine clicked on its own. Static again, then a sound buried beneath it, muffled, faint, like another voice layered under hers. I turned up the volume. 2 words surfaced before the noise swallowed them. A name I recognized from the ledger. Burke. I stepped back, shaking. The ledger, the debts, the forged signature. All of it bleeding into one truth I wasn't ready to face. The phone rang suddenly, slicing through the static. I nearly dropped the receiver. Unknown number. Midnight. I let it ring. "Answer it," I told myself. "You need to know." But fear held me still. The sound went on, shrill, relentless. Then silence. I unplugged the cord, but the machine kept humming, its internal motor refusing to die. I grabbed the cassette, feeling the ridges of the tape through the plastic. It was old, brittle, but intact. I held it to my ear. Faintly, through the casing, I could still hear her voice looping. I shut my eyes and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me when you were alive?" The door creaked. A faint knock. "Margaret?" It was Robert, the friend who'd helped with the funeral arrangements, my reluctant protector these days. His voice came through the wood, steady but concerned. "Are you up?" "Yes," I said. My own voice sounded far away. He opened the door a few inches. "It's late. The lights, are you all right?" I gestured to the machine. "She left a message." He frowned. "That's not possible." "I heard her. It's her voice." He stepped closer, studying the cassette as if it might vanish. "Grief can do strange things," he said softly. "You've been surrounded by reminders, her handwriting, her voice and memory." "It's not memory," I snapped. "It's proof." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then lock it away for now, until we know what it really is." "Why?" "Because if you're right," he said, lowering his tone, "someone else might want it more than you do." I stared at him, realizing he believed me, but wouldn't admit it aloud. The unspoken tension hung between us. "I'll come by tomorrow," he added. "Just don't listen again tonight." When he left, I locked the door behind him. The house fell still except for the faint buzz of the machine. I pulled out the drawer of the old oak desk and placed the cassette inside. Its small black body looked harmless, but I knew better now. Nothing in this house was harmless. I turned the key and sealed it shut. For the first time since she died, I drew a boundary, not against her, but against what she left behind. No more guessing, no more chasing ghosts, not without consent. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already crossed that boundary, that by playing the tape, I'd opened a door she meant to keep closed. The light on the machine flickered once, then went dark. I exhaled, finally. But as I turned away, the phone rang again. No caller ID. He smiled like he owned my grief. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Measured, rehearsed, official. The man stood in the doorway with a clipboard pressed tight against his chest, the word protective gleaming from the badge clipped to his jacket. Behind him, the cold March air crept into the room like an uninvited witness. "I'm here on a wellness inquiry," he said, voice smooth as a script, "just to ensure you're managing after your mother's passing." "I didn't request one," I replied. He looked down at the paper in his hand. "Someone close to you expressed concern." Concern. The word rolled off his tongue as if it belonged in a courtroom, not my living room. I stepped aside reluctantly, letting him in. He walked past me without waiting, eyes sweeping the room as if every object might testify. He sat in my mother's chair, the one by the window where she used to read the paper every morning. My stomach tightened. "You could have called first," I said. He smiled again, that same polished kind. "These visits work best unannounced." The chair creaked beneath him as he leaned forward, pen poised. "Have you been sleeping regularly?" I stayed standing. "As much as anyone who's lost a parent." He nodded, scribbling something down. "Any confusion? Memory lapses? Unexpected visitors?" The phrasing caught me. "What are you suggesting?" He ignored the question. "Do you have access to firearms or prescription medication?" I let out a quiet laugh. No and no. The room felt colder now, the kind of chill that doesn't come from open windows. The air changed with his presence, clinical, dissecting. "You mentioned someone close made this report," I said. "Who?" He hesitated, eyes flicking toward his badge as though it could answer for him. "That information's confidential." I stepped closer. "Then I'm not required to cooperate." He looked up from his form, tone softening. "You seem defensive, Ms." I cut him off. "You can write that down too." The silence hung heavy. He cleared his throat, his pen scratching another note. "It's important to understand this process isn't punitive. We're just ensuring your well-being." "By sitting in my dead mother's chair?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Outside, I saw Mrs. Alden, my elderly neighbor, pausing at the edge of her porch. Her eyes met mine through the window, worried, protective. She stepped closer, knocking gently. I opened the door enough for her to speak. "Everything all right in there?" "Yes," I said, though my voice sounded hollow. The man rose from the chair, his tone suddenly clipped. "We can continue this formally if needed. If you refuse a voluntary visit, we'll need documentation." "Documentation for what?" He pulled a paper from his folder and handed it to me. At the bottom, a familiar signature curved across the line. My sister's, authorizing the welfare check. My pulse slowed to something sharp and deliberate. "She did this," I whispered. He pretended not to hear. "We just act on referrals." "She told you I wasn't fit, didn't she?" He avoided my gaze. "This form only states concern for your safety and financial decision-making capacity." I stared at him. "You mean she thinks I'm incompetent?" His tone cooled. "We prefer the term assessment." Mrs. Alden stepped forward then, voice trembling but firm. "I've known her 20 years. She doesn't need any assessment. She needs peace." The man's pen stopped mid-note. "Ma'am, I can't discuss—" "You can leave," she said. He exhaled, irritation flashing briefly across his face. Then he tucked the paper back into his folder. "I'll make a note that the subject was uncooperative." "Write whatever you want," I said. "Just make sure you spell my name correctly." He walked to the door, pausing with one hand on the frame. "These processes don't end here," he said softly, almost like a warning. Outside, the wind caught the edge of his coat as he turned down the path. I closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the cold fade inch by inch. My fingers brushed the paper he'd handed me. The ink where my sister's name sat glistened faintly, still wet. I turned to Mrs. Alden. She's trying to take control of everything. Her eyes softened. "Then you make sure she can't." I nodded, the boundary forming in my chest like steel. From this moment, no one enters without consent. I folded the form once, twice, then slipped it into the drawer beside the locked cassette. The air began to warm again, but it carried a warning. Some storms don't start outside. They start with family. A faint echo of his words lingered as I shut the drawer. His last words, "We'll see you in court." They painted me as unfit to love. That was the first line read into record, clean, rehearsed, and venomous. The courtroom's air was too still, like breath being held. My sister sat across from me, her hair pinned perfectly, her expression carefully blank. Her lawyer stood tall, pacing between polished benches as if this was theater, and I was the villain in her script. "Unstable," he said, "erratic, unable to manage her own affairs." Each word dropped like a gavel before the real one had even fallen. The whispers behind me spread like static. Every eye in that room felt like a verdict. The arbiter, a woman with silver hair and an expression both tired and alert, watched without blinking. She had the calm of someone who's seen too many families destroy themselves for less. "Let her respond," she said quietly. I stood. My palms left faint prints on the wooden table. I took a slow breath. "Everything they're claiming," I began, "is built on what my mother left unfinished." The light from the high window struck the table at an angle, spilling across the documents I'd brought, the ledger, the authorization form, the welfare report. Each glimmered like an accusation caught in daylight. "My sister filed this petition," I said, lifting the first document, "to assume control of the estate. But she didn't tell you that before our mother died, she transferred funds into an account under both our names, without my consent." The lawyer interrupted. "Objection, speculation." "It's evidence," I countered. "Reference entry A12B93, verified by the bank itself." The arbiter nodded slightly. "Proceed." I placed the next paper on the table. "Here's the signature authorization from that account. One signature is mine, one was forged. Your experts can confirm the ink pressure and stroke pattern." The murmuring grew louder. Even the court clerk looked up from her notes. The lawyer shifted tone, adopting pity. "Grief can distort memory. My client simply wishes to ensure her sister's safety and the integrity of their mother's assets." "Safety?" I asked. "You sent protective services to my house. You had a man sit in my mother's chair, accuse me of delusion, and file me as uncooperative." My voice shook, not from fear, but from holding too much truth at once. I steadied it. "If that's protection, what would harm look like?" The arbiter's gaze lingered on me. "Do you have corroborating proof of these claims?" "I do." I reached into my bag and drew out the small black cassette. Its label had faded, edges frayed, but its weight was undeniable. "This recording was left on my answering machine a week after the funeral. It's her voice, my mother's. She says, 'They will come for what's not theirs.'" A murmur ran through the benches. My sister's lawyer adjusted his glasses, pretending not to flinch. "She was frightened," I continued. "Not of me, of what she set in motion. This tape, this ledger, her forged documents, they aren't random. They're a trail she left behind." My sister leaned forward, whispering something to her lawyer, but her voice reached me anyway. "She's unraveling." I met her eyes. "No, you are." The arbiter tapped her pen once, the sound crisp as thunder in the hush. "This court will review the presented materials. Until authentication, no control will be transferred." My sister's lawyer protested. "Your Honor, this delays vital management of assets." The gavel struck once, silencing him. "It delays nothing that truth won't decide," the arbiter said. The light shifted again, brighter now, almost intrusive, highlighting the tension between us. I felt it on my hands, on the papers, like exposure. My sister looked away, and for the first time since the proceedings began, I saw fear where poise had lived. The arbiter gathered her notes. "Ms." She paused, considering me. "Do you have the original recording device?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. "It's locked in my home." "Then bring it," she said. "This court requests the original tape." The gavel fell again. Not final. Not yet. Just enough to echo through the room, through my bones, through every lie that had been spoken about me. Public reckoning had begun. Truth hides best in storage boxes. That's what the clerk said, half smiling, as she slid a cart toward me. 3 boxes stacked neatly, tied with faded ribbons. The municipal archive smelled of dust and disuse, the kind of place where time went to sleep but never really died. The light was flat, gray through the high windows, turning everything into memory before I'd even opened the first lid. Her name was stamped on every side, bold, official, indelible. Seeing it in ink made something inside me lock tight. "Take your time," the clerk murmured. "They've been here for years." I knelt beside the cart, the floor cold through my skirt, and tugged one ribbon loose. The bow came undone with a dry sigh, as if even fabric was tired of keeping secrets. Inside, files, folders, correspondence, all dated and numbered with clerical precision. Each letter was typed on onion skin paper, so thin the words from the back bled faintly through. The texture grated against my fingertips, crisp, fragile, alive. I skimmed one after another. Donation repayment enforcement. Asset recovery, voluntary compliance preferred. It read like a language of kindness twisted into leverage. Every letter bore her signature, that looping flourish I knew by heart. But what cut deeper was the tone. Polite, legal, merciless. My mother had built her compassion like an institution, carefully documented, enforceable by law. The gatekeeper lingered near the desk, pretending to organize something. Her posture told me she was watching. "Did you know her?" I asked quietly. "Only by paperwork," she said. She was thorough. I nodded, sliding another letter free. It was dated 2 summers before she died. Addressed to a church board. Reimbursement expected upon liquidation. Beneath the closing line, "Faith must honor debt." My stomach turned. "She kept copies of everything?" I asked. The clerk gestured to the boxes. "She filed duplicates with us. It's rare. Most families destroy personal correspondence before donation." "Not her," I whispered. She knew someone would come looking. I turned another page and froze. The next envelope was addressed not to a charity, not to a neighbor, but to my sister. Subject: future occupancy transfer. The letter began coldly, the way legal things often do. Upon confirmation of decline, full property rights revert to recipient in recognition of filial loyalty. Decline. That was the word she used, for me. I read the line again. Once, she weakens. My breath hitched. My mother had not only anticipated betrayal, she'd written it into the architecture of her will. The clerk must have seen my hands tremble because she came closer. "There's more," she said softly. "That folder at the bottom. It's marked personal." I reached for it, my fingers brushing against its coarse edge. The paper felt heavier, denser. The ribbon around it was red, not beige. I hesitated. "You sure you want to open it here?" the clerk asked. "I've opened worse," I said. The knot resisted at first, then gave way with a sudden snap. Inside were letters without return addresses, carbon copies of typewritten pages marked "Private Record." One was to the bank that held our trust. Authorize joint liability upon next renewal. Ensure her inclusion. Her debt completes the circle. Another was to the welfare board. Investigate her resilience discreetly. My pulse raced. Investigate her resilience. The phrase sounded like cruelty in disguise. The clerk frowned. She was methodical. Every instruction had a mirror copy. Every copy had a witness line. That's why people trusted her. "No," I said quietly. That's why they feared her. Leaned back against the file cabinet. The cool metal seeped through my blouse, grounding me. The stakes were no longer emotional. They were legal, structural, alive. My mother's reach hadn't ended with her death. It had metastasized into bureaucracy. I stacked the letters neatly, one atop another, tracing the grooves where her typewriter keys had bitten into paper decades ago. Each indentation was a heartbeat preserved. The gatekeeper handed me a document sleeve. "If you're submitting this as part of your case, make a note of the archive reference code." "I will," I said, though my voice felt far away. As I slid the letters into the sleeve, something at the very bottom caught my eye, a smaller envelope, thicker than the rest. The flap was unbroken, its seal intact beneath a faint smear of wax. My name was typed across the front, the letters uneven, as if she'd hesitated mid-stroke. I ran my thumb across the surface. The paper was warm from my touch, but the meaning underneath it felt cold as stone. One envelope remained sealed, with my name. I tore open the past. The paper resisted like skin that didn't want to break. The envelope's seal cracked softly, releasing a faint trace of her perfume. Something floral, almost gone, but unmistakably hers. It hit me harder than I expected. That scent used to mean comfort. Now it meant warning. The air in the room thickened as I unfolded the page inside. Her handwriting wavered across the paper, slanted and uneven. She had written it with haste, or guilt. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to read every word. "To whom it may concern, should concern ever arise." I could hear her voice, the same tone she used when she'd tell us not to question her decisions. She wrote of debts, not just financial, but moral ones, of men who'd helped her keep us safe. Those were her words, wrapped in quotation marks, as if she knew they wouldn't stand scrutiny. Each line made my chest tighten. She listed names, some unfamiliar, others painfully close. And then, him, my sister's husband. I stopped breathing for a second. "Harold arranged the paperwork," she wrote. "He said the state would honor protection if the funds remained under trust." I agreed, for the girls. I read the line twice, maybe 3 times. She wasn't protecting us. She was securing her own absolution. The sound of paper shifting broke my focus. Robert, my protector, the only one left I halfway trusted, had been standing behind me, silent until now. He stepped closer and reached out his hand. I let him take the letter. He read it slowly, lips tightening around each word. When he finished, he didn't look up right away. "She was being blackmailed," he said finally. "Or she was complicit," I answered. He exhaled, folding the page as if it were fragile. "Maybe both." I sat down on the edge of the desk, staring at the envelope. Its edges were soft, worn from years of waiting. "She kept it sealed," I murmured. "She knew I'd find it. She wanted control even after death." Robert's gaze was steady but heavy. "You know what this means, don't you? The welfare check, the forged signature, all of it leads back to him." I nodded slowly. "And she enabled it. She thought she was protecting the family." "By destroying it?" I shot back. The words came sharper than I intended, then quieter. "She thought obedience was love. Maybe that's what she taught us all." The room felt colder. The candle on the desk burned low, the wax sliding down like slow tears. I could smell its faint smoke mixing with her perfume, 2 ghosts in the same space. I took the letter from Robert, careful not to crease it further. "This stays with me," I said. "You'll need to file it." "Not yet." He hesitated. "If you wait too long, they'll claim it's fabricated." I met his eyes. "Let them try. Every signature she forged, every report they filed, it's traceable. I'm done playing defense." Robert gave a small nod. "Then draw your line." I already did. I folded the confession once more, sealing it in a new envelope of my own, this one blank. The act felt small, symbolic, but it mattered. I had spent months following her rules, living in the shadow of what she left behind. Now the rules were mine. I stood, sliding the new envelope into the drawer with the others, the ledger, the tape, the welfare report. My proof, my inheritance of truth. The candle flickered, and I watched its last bit of flame before I blew it out. The smoke curled upward, carrying her perfume into the dark, as if the past still begged to be remembered. Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. "You look like her when you stand like that." I didn't turn. "Then I'll stand differently." I reached for the sealed drawer and locked it. No one gets in again. Not family, not him, not anyone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reclaimed. And then I saw it. The page in Robert's hand trembled slightly, though no wind blew. They turned my grief into headlines. By morning, the world had already decided what kind of woman I was. The camera crews lined the curb, lenses glinting in the cold light like rifles ready to fire. The grass was wet, trampled by reporters shouting my name, each one hungry for a confession I hadn't written. The first headline hit my phone before I'd even stepped outside. "Heiress conceals truth about mother's estate." The photo beneath it showed me at the courthouse door, mid-blink, mouth open, vulnerable. They'd captured exhaustion and framed it as guilt. When I opened the gate, the noise doubled. "Did you forge the letter? Were you declared unfit? Is it true she disinherited you?" I kept walking, each step a refusal, but the flashes followed, relentless, until one voice cut through the chaos. "You might want to see this," it said. It was Claire, a journalist I half-trusted, the only one who still believed in evidence more than spectacle. She held up her phone. On the screen, an image of my mother's typed correspondence, cropped and edited, words I'd read in private, now rewritten by strangers for profit. "Who leaked this?" I asked. She hesitated. "Someone with access to your legal submissions, probably internal." A pulse started behind my eyes. "So, my sister?" Claire didn't answer, but her silence confirmed what I already knew. Back inside, the air felt stale, the curtains half drawn. My witness, old Mr. Dyer from across the street, stood near the window, watching the flashing lights. "They'll eat you alive if you don't speak," he said quietly. "I won't feed them lies," I replied. He nodded. "Then make them choke on the truth." I almost smiled, but the television on the counter stole my breath. Another segment, another round of commentary dissecting my life. The anchor's voice was syrup smooth, cruelly polite. In an exclusive revelation, private letters suggest decades of coercion within the family's financial dealings. I stared at the scrolling text beneath. Sources close to the estate confirm a pattern of instability. My sister's smirk flashed across the screen in a courtroom photo. Same pearl earrings, same icy calm. She'd always known how to weaponize poise. I called her. She answered on the second ring. "You've been busy," I said. She exhaled dramatically. "You're paranoid. The press has my mother's letters, Anne. Only 2 people had those files, you and my attorney. You think I'd risk perjury for attention? You already did worse for inheritance." There was a pause, then a low, knowing laugh. "You wanted a stage. Now you have one." The line went dead. Outside, another wave of flashbulbs exploded through the windows. I stepped back from the glare. The light wasn't illumination. It was exposure, merciless and cold. Claire sent another message. "It's escalating. Prepare a statement." Instead, I drafted documentation, proof of forgery, authentication requests, timestamps, bank ledgers. My attorney's number was on speed dial. "We'll counter with defamation," he said over the hum of background chaos. "Stay composed. Truth needs discipline." But truth, I'd learned, was the least disciplined thing of all. It leaked, it wandered, it made allies with shadows. By late evening, My lawn looked like a battlefield of footprints and tangled cables. Reporters were still camped by the gate, their voices echoing through the neighborhood. I pulled the blinds shut and sat in the half-dark, only the glow from the television keeping the room alive. That's when I saw it. A headline froze mid-broadcast. Exclusive, the mother's final sightings. My breath caught. The image flickered, grainy and faint, but clear enough to know what it meant. It was her, my mother, standing in front of a post office, the date stamp on the photo unmistakable, weeks after her recorded death. The reporter's voice trembled as he said it. One photo showed her alive after the date of death. They made my life a performance. Rows of folding chairs stretched before me like an audience waiting for spectacle, not truth. The old auditorium smelled of varnish and memory. I stood behind the microphone, the metal stem trembling slightly under my hand. The arbiter adjusted his glasses and nodded for me to begin. Every seat was filled, neighbors, reporters, the curious, the cruel. My sister sat in the second row, arms crossed, a faint smile like she'd already rehearsed the ending. The microphone hummed. "This isn't theater," I began. "It's restitution." No one spoke. I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights, that sharp electric hum that comes right before something burns out. The arbiter opened a folder. "You've submitted documents regarding the estate, correspondence, ledgers, personal statements. Would you like to address the figures directly?" "Yes." I unfolded the ledger, the same one she'd denied existed. The paper still smelled faintly of ink and dust. The accounts list charitable withdrawals, 48 transactions across 6 years, total amount $92,000, each marked as donation. A murmur rippled through the rows, low at first, then rising. I lifted one letter high enough for all to see. "Here's the truth you ignored. Notice of property audit, signed by probate court, dated 2 years before her death." Someone shouted, "You mean she owed the charities?" "She disguised repayment as benevolence," I said. "She paid them to protect her reputation, and she used my inheritance to do it." The arbiter cleared his throat. "Do you have corroborating evidence?" I handed him a transcript, typed, bound, each page numbered. "Record of her confession, verified by archive witness. Reference code N174B. He skimmed the first few lines. "It's signed," he said, almost to himself. The crowd shifted uneasily. A woman near the back whispered, "She's been right all along." I leaned closer to the mic. "This isn't about money. It's about dignity. She made morality transactional, and we let her." From the side aisle, a man raised his hand. "If she was so controlling, why not expose her earlier?" I took a breath. "Because love makes accomplices of us all." A few heads turned. Silence hovered for a moment, a fragile, suspended thing. Then someone coughed, another muttered agreement. The arbiter gestured for order. "Please remain civil. The record must stay clear." I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. The sound of my own heartbeat seemed louder than the murmurs. The microphone crackled as I continued. "These records show a pattern of coercion through debt. Each so-called act of generosity came with a clause. Sign here, stay loyal, don't, and lose everything." Claire, the journalist, sat near the front row, her pen flying across the page. When she looked up, her eyes were damp. A man near the aisle barked, "What happens now?" The arbiter straightened. "This proceeds to legal evaluation. Potential restitution for misappropriation, both moral and financial." The word financial echoed through the room, bouncing off the rafters. For a moment, it felt like the ceiling itself held judgment. I turned back toward my sister. "You wanted spectacle," I said quietly, but the microphone caught it anyway. "You have it." Her smirk faltered. Then another voice, sharp, demanding, rose from the far end. "How much of that was your share?" The question sliced clean through the air. I met his eyes. "All of it," I said. "Every cent taken from my trust, signed under her authority. You can check the signatures. They match perfectly, even the ones she shouldn't have been able to write." Gasps rippled again. Someone dropped a pen. The arbiter's assistant began copying the totals onto a projected screen. The numbers glowed large and merciless. 92,000. The sum looked obscene under fluorescent light. "This isn't vengeance," I said. "It's accounting." The arbiter nodded once. "For the record, all evidence has been entered." The tension throbbed like static. The sound of outrage, low voices, hisses, one shouted accusation, swelled through the room until it felt alive, breathing, growing. "Order!" the arbiter demanded. But no one listened. I took one step back, my voice rising over the noise. "We can't rewrite the past, but we can audit its truth." The microphone buzzed again. The hum turned sharper, angrier. I could smell heat, the wires straining under too much current. Then, just as I reached for the next page, the lights flickered once, twice, and went out mid-sentence. Static as memory refusing to die. The courtroom speakers hissed before the voice emerged, thin, fragile, but alive. The tape had waited years for this moment, wound tight around its truth. When the playback began, the room fell still enough to hear breaths being held. Her voice came through the static, trembling, hesitant. "I did it to keep them safe," she said. "But they wanted more. They always want more." The words drifted through the hall like smoke, impossible to contain. The sound carried the weight of every unspoken year. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Let it play through," he said, his tone steady but strained. The machine clicked softly, a pulse of mechanical heartbeats. Then came another voice, male, confident, slippery, my sister's husband. "You'll be compensated," he said. "Just sign where I marked." Gasps rippled through the benches. A journalist's pen froze mid-note. The sound quality cracked, but the meaning was clear. My protector, seated beside me, murmured, "That's your proof." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The air felt charged, heavy with everything I'd known but couldn't prove. Then her voice again, soft, resigned. "I trusted them. I thought family meant safety." The static swallowed her words for a moment, then spat them back, distorted. "Safety. Safety." I closed my eyes. The repetition cut like glass. The judge raised a hand toward the technician. "Pause there. Confirm authenticity." The clerk stepped forward, holding the verification document. "Audio playback. Reference code C1098D. Timestamp matches the original log entry from the Department of Records." He handed it over. The judge examined the page, his brow tightening. "Chain of custody is intact," he announced. "Evidence stands." A low murmur rolled through the spectators. Someone whispered, "So she admitted it." Another hissed, "No, she was coerced." I looked across the aisle. My sister's husband sat rigid, color draining from his face. He'd always prided himself on control, but the tape stripped him bare. His hands fidgeted against the polished table, small tremors betraying the cracks. The playback resumed. "I knew it was wrong," my mother's voice quivered. "But he said they'd ruin her if I didn't comply. The papers, the signatures, they're all tied to him. If this ever surfaces—" "Forgive me." That last word, "forgive," hung in the air long after the tape clicked off. Silence followed. Real silence. No whispers, no shifting chairs, no movement at all. Just the echo of that final word circling the room like a ghost that wouldn't leave. The judge cleared his throat, the sound startling in its smallness. "This recording," he said slowly, "confirms both manipulation and compliance. The court recognizes the material as institutional record." He nodded toward the clerk, who sealed the tape inside a labeled case. The red wax glistened faintly under the overhead light, a symbol of closure and consequence. My protector rested a hand on mine, firm and grounding. "You did it," he whispered. "Did I?" My voice came out hollow. "Or did she?" He didn't reply. There was nothing to say. The balance had shifted, authority reclaimed, but at a cost no one in the room could measure. The prosecutor stood, voice crisp. "We request immediate motion for restitution review." The judge didn't look up. "You'll have it," he said quietly, "but not today." For a moment I thought I heard the faint hum of the tape still turning, though the machine was silent. Or maybe it was just the sound of justice catching its breath. As people began to stand, papers rustling like restless leaves, I stayed seated. The ache beneath victory was deep, raw. Justice can sound hollow when it echoes through ruin. The judge glanced at the sealed evidence once more, then spoke, voice low but final. "The court," he said, "is adjourned." The gavel struck. The sound, clean, final, split the silence in two. Truth stood taller than blood. The courtroom was quieter than I had ever known it. No whispers this time, no flashbulbs, no reporters rushing to file their outrage, just the sound of papers being turned and the echo of the judge's slow, deliberate voice filling the air like scripture. He read each word with a weight that pressed against my chest. Transfer of estate, voided. Guardianship, dissolved. Assets, restored to rightful ownership. The words didn't feel real at first. I'd imagined this moment so many times that hearing it aloud felt almost fictional, like someone else's justice playing through my life. My sister's breath hitched, a sharp sound, small but loud in the hush. When I looked her way, her face was streaked with tears she hadn't earned. Her husband sat rigid, expression collapsing into the blank stare of someone calculating loss. The bailiff touched his arm, then guided him toward the exit. I didn't look away. I wanted to see what denial looked like when it lost its last defense. The arbiter, seated near the bench, adjusted his notes and gave a single, deliberate nod, a silent acknowledgement that our fight, his guidance, my endurance, had held. The judge continued. All documents entered under coercion or misrepresentation are rendered null. The court recognizes evidence reference J214C as conclusive. He set the ruling on the stand. The seal pressed into the paper gleamed briefly as a shaft of light fell through the high stained glass. It wasn't just light, it was color, fractured through old dust, painting everything in quiet absolution. The room exhaled. A low murmur began, approval, disbelief, relief. Someone near the back whispered, "Finally." The clerk stepped forward with the envelope bearing the court's seal. When it touched my hands, it felt heavier than its size should allow. Years of silence folded between thin pages. I heard my mother's voice somewhere in memory. Keep what's yours by truth, not by force. The irony bit, but gently. She'd forged control out of fear. I'd found freedom by refusing to repeat her ways. Outside, the bells from the nearby chapel began to ring, 3 times, slow and deliberate. The timing felt almost theatrical, as if the world itself needed to mark the end. My protector leaned closer, speaking just above a whisper. "You won, you know." I shook my head. "No, I just stopped losing." He smiled faintly, but his eyes carried the same exhaustion I felt, the kind that comes not from battle, but from surviving one. The judge signed the final page and placed it atop the others. "Case concluded," he said. "The record is sealed under federal custody." He tapped the gavel once, the sound crisp and final. People began to rise, chairs scraping softly against the wooden floor. My sister covered her face, shoulders shaking, though I couldn't tell if she cried for shame or for herself. I didn't gloat. There was no triumph left in me, only a hollow calm. The kind of stillness that follows a long storm, when debris still floats in the water, but the wind has finally gone quiet. I stood, clutching the sealed letter, the legal restoration, the proof of a long-fought truth. My fingertips brushed the embossed court insignia. It felt like sanded wax and dust, fragile and ancient. The light shifted again, pouring through the window just as the arbiter closed his ledger. It landed across my hands, pale gold against the parchment. In that glow, I saw the cost of every signature, every sleepless night, every silence endured. Freedom, at last. And yet it didn't roar. It whispered, soft as paper, dry as dust. I stepped forward, placed the document back on the bench for record, and breathed in the air of a room finally emptied of lies. Freedom tasted like old paper and dust. Every room carries its own ghost. The house was quieter than it had ever been. No footsteps, no voices, just the low hum of air moving through half-open windows. I moved slowly, touching the edges of furniture that had once defined a family. The dust didn't bother me anymore. It felt almost sacred, like a veil left behind by time. The protector arrived early, sleeves rolled, carrying a box marked "Keep." His silence said more than any sympathy could. Together we began what no court could finish, clearing the house of memory. He asked gently, "Are you sure about this?" I nodded. "I've been sure for years. I just didn't have permission until now." The air shifted as the first window opened. Cold morning wind rushed in, carrying the faint scent of rain. It cut through the stale air like honesty through denial. The curtains swayed, their motion soft, almost forgiving. I started with the study, the room where the ledgers once sat. Every drawer, every paper was a witness. We found an old receipt from 15 years ago, 2 chairs, bought for $480, labeled "Guest Set." I remembered her handwriting, the neat loops, the control in every letter. "She cataloged everything," I murmured. "That's how she lived," he replied, "and how she lost." We packed carefully, one box for truth, another for what didn't need to survive. The protector taped them closed, each strip sounding like a verdict sealing itself. In the second bedroom, I found an old photograph pressed beneath a cracked mirror. Her smile was softer than I remembered, unguarded, almost innocent. "This was before the inheritance," I said quietly. He glanced over. "You keeping it?" I studied it for a long moment. "Only the original. Duplicates burn." Outside in the yard, we lit a small metal dish. The paper curled, edges glowing orange, then gray. Ash drifted upward, fragile and determined, caught briefly in the light before disappearing into air. The warmth brushed my hand, a fleeting sense of forgiveness, not from her, but from myself. Inside again, the house felt lighter. I could hear floorboards settling, like the structure itself exhaled after holding its breath too long. The protector leaned against the doorway. "Feels different already." "It should," I said. "It's the first honest air this place has had in years." We worked until the light began to fade. I folded linens, stacked books, and labeled 2 more boxes, one marked "Release," one "Future." The difference between them was simple: what still carried life and what didn't. As I opened the last window in the hallway, the breeze swept through, cool and steady. The scent of ash lingered faintly, warm, clean, final. He asked, almost hesitant, "You'll stay here?" I looked around. The rooms were stripped of sentiment, yet full of clarity. "For a while," I said, "until I can live here without hearing her voice." He smiled faintly. "That might take time." "I have time," I replied. "And peace, finally." We carried the last box to the porch. The sky had turned pale gold, and the light filtered through the open doorway, painting the floor in long, thin bands. For a moment, the whole house seemed to glow. I thought about everything lost: money, reputation, years of love twisted into power. Justice hadn't brought applause or celebration. It had brought quiet. And maybe that was all I ever needed. I walked back inside one last time, barefoot now, to feel the wooden boards under me. The chill of the floor grounded me, reminded me that this place, for all its ghosts, was still mine. In the living room, I ran my fingers along the edge of a drawer, tracing the groove of its handle. It didn't move. One drawer still locked. It was smaller than I remembered. The brass key had been sitting in my palm for hours before I finally used it. Its edges were smooth from years of waiting, the metal dulled to a soft gold by time and hesitation. I knelt before the drawer, the one I couldn't open, the one that had outlasted lawyers, dust, and grief. The lock turned easily, almost too easily, as if it had been waiting for me to stop fighting. A quiet click, a breath of air, and the drawer slid open. Inside lay a single velvet pouch, faded blue, edges frayed. I reached in carefully, the fabric whispering against my skin. The texture of age was unmistakable, soft but stubborn, like the memory of someone you tried to forget and never could. I untied the thread. A small locket fell into my hand, cool at first, then warming against my skin. The faint engraving on the front had almost vanished, just the ghost of initials, hers and mine. My neighbor, the one who had helped me sort the remnants of this place, stood quietly in the doorway. He didn't speak at first. When he finally did, his voice was low. "Some things survive the burning." I nodded. Some shouldn't, but this one, maybe it should. I pressed the clasp. It opened with a tiny sigh, like it remembered being touched. Inside, 2 faces stared back, hers and mine. Younger, softer, before the war between love and power began. The air in the room shifted. The breeze through the open window carried a faint chill, brushing against my neck. The smell of ash had faded days ago, but something still lingered, the aftertaste of memory, clean and weightless. I traced the photograph inside with my thumb. The metal warmed further, almost alive. My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from release. "She used to wear it every day," I whispered. Said it reminded her that love could be held, even if it couldn't be trusted. He stepped closer, studying the locket. "And now it's yours." "I suppose it always was," I said. "I just couldn't bear to open the drawer before now." He smiled faintly, not the kind meant for comfort, but recognition. The look of someone who's lost and rebuilt and knows the difference. The silence stretched, soft and kind. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. I sat on the floor, the sunlight reaching across the room, touching the locket with a muted glow. The reflection shimmered briefly across the wooden boards, golden and trembling, before settling into stillness. For a long while I didn't move. I let the warmth seep into me, into the space where anger used to live. "I think I forgive her," I said finally. The neighbor tilted his head. "Even after everything?" "Especially after everything," my voice caught. "Forgiveness isn't letting her win. It's refusing to keep the war alive." He nodded, then quietly left the room, the sound of his footsteps fading down the hall. I stayed there, holding the locket between my palms. The thread that had tied it once was still coiled in the velvet pouch, a thin, fragile thing. I wrapped it gently around my wrist, not as a tether, but as a reminder. Outside, a bird called from somewhere near the open window. The sound was simple, clean, and unbroken. I closed the locket, listening to the faint click as it sealed. The sound was neither final nor sad, just a quiet promise to remember without reopening the wound. The locket clicked shut, not locked, but kept. I burned only what lied. The first spark caught quietly, a soft bloom of orange eating into fabric. I watched it take, slow and sure, the flame licking through the folds of an old blouse she once favored. It wasn't about destruction anymore. It was release. Every thread carried its own deceit, and I was finally done keeping its weight. The dawn had just begun to pale the horizon. Light crept through the open window, washing the room in a color that wasn't quite gold, not quite gray. I could hear the world waking. Birds, wind, a distant church bell marking the hour. Time felt newly honest. On the table lay the arbiter's letter, the paper marked with the seal that ended everything. Case closed, guardianship dissolved, all matters reconciled. I had read it twice already, but now it rested there like proof of a long journey finished. I whispered, "No more shadows." The scent of lavender hung faintly in the air, though I hadn't opened a bottle in weeks. It must have lingered from her linens, trapped in fibers now curling under flame. The smell rose softer with heat, a ghost surrendering to morning. I added another piece, a scarf, torn at the edge where time had eaten through it. It caught instantly, a small whoosh, then quiet. "She said to burn her clothes after she was gone," I murmured, remembering the letter she'd written before everything fell apart. Back then, I thought it cruel. Her last command another act of control. Now, it felt like an instruction to free both of us. The protector, now more friend than official, stood in the doorway, watching in silence. His presence was steady, like the frame of the house itself, still standing after all storms. He asked softly, "Are you sure this is what you want?" "It's what's left," I said. "Everything else has already been judged, measured, forgiven." The words surprised me. Forgiven. I hadn't planned to say it, but they felt true in the air, and the truth no longer frightened me. The flame grew higher for a moment, casting light that shimmered across the floorboards. I could see the dust floating through it, tiny particles, silver in the dawn glow. Every one of them looked like a memory breaking apart. The arbiter's letter caught the edge of sunlight, the seal glinting faintly. I didn't burn it. Some records deserved to remain. I thought of all that had been uncovered. The debts, the lies, the forged signatures, the secrets dressed as kindness. But even deceit, once exposed, loses its teeth. What stayed behind wasn't hate. It was clarity. The window glass warmed beneath the first full beam of sunrise. My reflection looked older, lighter. The same eyes, but the burden behind them had thinned. "Let her rest," I said quietly. "I remain." The protector gave a small nod, then stepped outside, letting the cool air rush in. The final sleeve turned to ash. The last thread glowed red, then black, then gone. I waited until the smoke thinned before closing the window. The air smelled faintly of warmth and something like forgiveness. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. Outside, the sky stretched wide and open. A new day began its slow climb, indifferent to what had ended here, yet somehow bearing witness. I stood still for a moment longer, feeling the quiet hum of peace settle into the walls. The light deepened, spilling through the window and touching the last wisp of smoke as it curled upward, graceful, unbound. The smoke rose clean into morning light.